Here is my written account of the 4 Bigfoot sightings I told you about. I will start by giving you a little background as to the year, area, and season. The year is about 1978, give or take a year or so. The area is between Adel and West Des Moines, Iowa, roughly following the Raccoon River. It is late fall in November. The story starts when a girlfriend of mine told me about a neighbor of hers, a farmer, who said that early on one morning, about 4 a.m., as he was making coffee, he noticed a big creature standing beneath his yard light. He described it as standing about 7 feet tall and covered with black hair. He watched it for a while until it walked away. I didn't think much about it until a few days later when I heard on the news that a truck driver on I-80 at the vicinity of the Raccoon River saw apparently the same creature in his headlights. I was surprised when I heard this given the story from my girlfriend just a few days prior. As it happened, a few days after that I was talking to a friend of mine from high school about the same sightings. He began telling me too that he had seen the creature, almost he did not report it. He said that one evening during the same time period and in the same area, he went to a small cabin he'd built in the woods near the river. As he approached the structure, a tall creature with black hair jumped up and ran out the door. He assumed it had been sleeping on the floor in a pile of leaves. This building was not completed, and there was no roof. It was just turning dark, so he didn't get a good look at it. But because he was so close there was no mistaking its size. He described it as about 7 feet tall and covered with black hair. It scared him so much that he ran in the opposite direction. What happened next was truly amazing to me. A few days later, my brother who farms with me was driving a tractor home from the fields very late at night. It was around 11:30 p.m. with a full moon and just a dusting of snow on the ground. He stopped in a rural portion of West Des Moines and watched as 2 Bigfoot creatures walked calmly by the side of the road. They were about 100 yards away and walked parallel to the road beside a fence in an open area that has no trees. One of the creatures was taller, at about 7 feet, and the second was about a foot shorter. He said they had long swinging arms, a short neck, black hair from head to toe, and they were not afraid of his presence, although he was some distance away. He reported to me that the next day he went back for another look, and to his surprise discovered that the area where these creatures had been was covered with dense, short, prickly underbrush. There is no way a human could walk so freely in that area. It's just not possible. But there is more. The next night or so, as I was working in our farm shop late into the evening, I heard a sound that I'll never forget. I can best describe it as a long, loud, mournful cry or wail. I suppose it lasted 5 to 10 seconds, and I heard it twice. It was not a dog, coyote, fox, or owl. I know the sounds of these animals, and I've never heard a large cat wail before, but it was a bit until like that, I suppose. When I first heard it, I immediately noticed that our 2 dogs took off running for the barn. That I'd never seen before. Usually animal sounds are returned with loud barking. We live about 3 miles north of where my brother saw both creatures, and my mother heard it too. I saw a Bigfoot when my aunt, cousin, and parents were camping at our property. We had a fire blazing, and we kept hearing these strange noises, branches breaking, and thumps. After about an hour of this, I was wondering what might be lurking in the woods, so I went over to the area where I heard the noises to see what it was. I went about 10 yards from the fire, and all of a sudden, something about waist high ran very fast in front of me. To this day, I don't know what it was. I turned, and about 9 feet away, I saw an 8-foot creature staring at me. I didn't get any facial details. I was too far away from the fire. I could tell that its head had a point on top. It stared at me for about 10 seconds, but I felt like it was 10 minutes. Then it did this slow turn away from me and walked off. I ran back into the cabin, and I did not come out for the rest of the night. I did not tell anybody right away because I thought it might have been a trick being played on me, played by my cousins. 6 months later, my parents and I found a 15-inch footprint alongside the pond at our property when we were fishing near the area of my sighting. We took pictures of the footprint, and about 2 years after my sighting, my dad and I were camping out our land. The same area, me and my dad heard a knock. The next day, I found a 20-inch footprint. I had a camera with me, and I took pictures of that same footprint. I have no doubt that there is a Sasquatch that has been living around our property, and I think it still might live there. I like to go to Gloch Park and watch the eagles. I used to stand in the middle of the bridge for a cigarette before I went home from work. I had done this a few days in a row, and that day I got out of my truck and felt like I shouldn't be there. As I walked to the middle of the bridge, I felt very uneasy. I lit my cigarette and stared out over the river. I felt like I was being watched, and I started to get scared. It was coming from the other side of the bridge on the right-hand side. Whatever it was, I knew that it was not human nor an animal, and it was a big male. I felt like he was just curious as to why I went there every day to the same spot and just wanted to watch what I was up to. I looked around and could not see anything. I built up my courage, looked down and started walking slowly to the other side of the bridge. As I started walking, I heard a big crash into the river and saw a huge log floating down. Then I heard a low huff, like someone letting out the air through their nose in frustration, with a little noise from the throat. The log had dried vegetation on it, so I knew it was laying on the forest floor. I don't know how many pounds it was, but it was huge. The biggest guy I know wouldn't have been able to throw this thing in the river with little to no effort. I looked to where it came from and saw nothing. I slowly turned around and walked slowly back to my truck. I wanted to run, but I didn't want it to run after me if I ran. I got into my truck and took off. I was scared and shaken. I haven't been out on that bridge by myself ever since. This is an old report, but recently, after watching the Better Bigfoot programs on TV, it dawned on me that what we had experienced was a Bigfoot. Every September, my husband and I would go hiking to see the color. This trip was in September of 1970 to Pikes Peak State Park, located on the highest bluff on the Mississippi River in Iowa. September is a time when the kids are back in school. There was only one other car in the parking lot, so the trails were deserted. Pikes Peak had several walking trails, and we had decided to take the longest, which led to the overlook on the Mississippi. We had hiked almost to the point of the overlook. Fall had us crunching on the fallen leaves when we heard a large thump, thump, thump from behind the trees, followed by a loud animal scream that we had never experienced before. Having hiked in the woods almost weekly, we learned to identify most of the animal sounds around us. This was not an identifiable animal. The screech scared us so badly that we immediately turned around and ran as fast as we could, all the way back to the ranger station. Having reached the ranger station, we immediately inquired about the animal we had just encountered. We explained in great detail what had happened, but the rangers said that they had no clue what it had encountered, and that nothing similar had ever been reported. To this day, I am still haunted by the sound of the footsteps and the screech. Until the Bigfoot programs, I had never considered that what we had encountered could be a Bigfoot. Now, I'm 90% sure of my identification. June 28th, 2006. I have earlier reported a Bigfoot sighting several years ago. This happened to be in Iowa, Decatur County, and so is this occurrence. If you have ever been at least a part-time sportsman and found yourself loving the nature around you, then you may know what I am speaking of. There are creatures and certain sounds that go along with any given area, sounds that birds and other familiar creatures will make. It wasn't until today, June 24th, 2008, that I put it together. A sound was recognized by myself, which I believe to be a Bigfoot. I will explain as best as I can. I returned to the parcel of land which I had my first visual experience of the creature. He sort of scared me off. I brought a friend with me to shoot some guns, as it is a very safe place to do so. We hadn't put too many rounds down range into a steep vertical bank, which is probably 50 foot high. We were less than 200 yards from the sighting location, and I could hear two huge rocks being smacked together. It was no coincidence. I have heard this before while in the woods, but only at two locations. It was quite rhythmic, and the number of smacks were like always equaling 4 to 6 in the count. I even mentioned too that the man who was with me, but the noise had stopped by the time he heard me over his ear protection. I also had earplugs in, but had no problem hearing the sounds. I kind of think this rock smacking is to let all others of their kind know about humans are around. I'm also thinking that it's to give an all clear message as it is happening at a specific time each time. I also think that they use the calls of nature's wildlife to communicate, particularly that of a great horned owl and a crow. This is due to the frequency of time and occurrence which I can't quite explain. It is something you have to experience for yourself. Me and 5 friends were walking in the woods at night on April 2nd this year, and we saw something pretty big and real thick and furry crouching behind a bush that was in between 2 trees. He had his hands on the tree and poked up to look at us. We had a video camera with us at the time, but it does not show the creature. The reason we had the camera with us was because all the dogs in our town were going crazy the last few days, and we had heard odd noises coming from down in those woods, which were right alongside the Des Moines River. We got extremely scared at the sight of this thing and took off running right after we flipped the camera light on to try to get it on tape. The next morning we went down to the same spot to try and find some evidence. We found nothing really important there, except some broken twigs and whatnot. However, a little ways away we found a large femur bone, either from a cow or a human. It was much too big to be a deer, and wasn't a horse. This led us to dig around, and we found 22 more bones. We also noticed a bunch of fur around the area, like rabbit or something. About a week later, we went back during the day, because we were scared of it at night, and found a deer dead with its rear bit completely off, shredded. Around 7 a.m., let's say the first week of November of 2007, I was making a phone call to try and get some help on a very large roof that I was working on. Standing to the right of the house, facing the back, is a large, open grassy field surrounded by woods. I was looking to the back, staring at this particular tree that stood out to me, when suddenly, something very tall, very large, stepped away from the tree looking at me. My arm with the phone dropped, and my jaw dropped, and I was thinking to myself, what the hell is that? Its fur was brown to reddish brown, and it covered the entire body that I could see from the waist up. Just as quickly as I had seen it, it made its way across the field in a matter of seconds. I was on the phone, but I took note of where I was standing, and that was around me. Next to me were a couple of snowmobiles, and about 5 feet in front of me was a red quad and was on the far right corner of concrete pad. The grass was very high because the day before I had noticed a couple of deer walking through the field, and all I could see was their back, neck, and heads. The next day, my brother-in-law came out and we walked back where I saw this thing. When I looked back towards the house, I couldn't see the red quad or snowmobiles at all. I saw no clear footprints out there. There were lots of trails through the grass that could have been made by anything. When this thing ran across the field, it was slightly leaning forward. It had to have been at least 7 or 8 feet tall in order for me to see its entire upper body over the grass. The next day when I showed up, I couldn't get in the house because the alarm had been triggered. I called the homeowner, and he said that something triggered in the basement door alarm and the basement window alarm that same night. He had to leave in a hurry and forgot to reset the alarm. I thought that was very interesting, but I did not tell him what I had seen the morning before. I was riding in the rear seat of a car with 3 others, all college students. We all lived same house in Fayette. It was a Friday night. Weather called for heavy snow overnight. We all were from the same area, about 25 miles away, decided to head there for a weekend or would be snowed in at Fayette by morning. We headed south in my brother's car. There was 4 inches of snow on the road, so we were going slow, about 25 miles an hour. I was leaning to the center of rear seat to see out front. I saw something moving in field up ahead, just in headlight range, about 200 feet ahead. It was big and moving towards the road. I hollered, "What the hell's that?" and elbowed Al, who was sleeping next to me. My brother let off gas. As we rolled on, we all watched as the creature never broke stride, stepped over a fence at least 40 inches high, into a ditch, across the ditch, up onto the road shoulder, to center road, to other shoulder, across ditch, over another 40-inch high fence, going into darkness as we passed by. It passed in front of us, from right to left, about 50 feet away, when it was center of road. It was big, at least 8 feet tall, covered from coned head to feet with dark brown hair. It had a barrel-shaped body with long arms and legs. It just walked like a human, taking long strides and swinging its arms. It crossed at angle from northwest to southeast, never turning to look at us, so we did not see its face. After passing, all were in shock, and someone said, "Let's stop to go look out for it." A big no was the response, and we went on our way. When I was little, I used to see shadow people. I used to sleep in my mom's bedroom as a child, and obviously, I went to bed before the rest of my family because I was so young. On one particular night, my parents tucked me into bed and left a light on for me and left the door open so that I wouldn't get scared. When they left, I saw what looked like a bunch of human shadows by the TV. I looked at them for a little while and they seemed to be moving, like they were walking on a city street. Being 6 years old, I got scared and hid under my covers and quickly went to sleep after that. I don't remember seeing them again in my mom's bedroom, but I do remember seeing them just out of the corner of my eye. I told my parents and they just thought it was just my imagination or my mind playing tricks on me. I'm still adamant to this day that I saw shadow people and even individuals who would stay in my room for a little while, as if they were watching me and then leave. I don't see them anymore, and I don't know if I'll ever see them again. August 24th, 2019. It's been almost 3 weeks since my father received his cancer diagnosis. It's a bright, sunny Saturday morning, and there's plenty to do around the house. So I put my earbuds on, selected a playlist from my iPhone, picked up the weed trimmer, and walked to the far corner of our 3-acre lot. It's your typical new suburban home in Central Florida. Lightly painted stucco walls with 2 to 3 understory trees and St. Augustine grass lawn. The mission for the day is to clear about 2 feet off the property line of any St. Augustine grass to continue planting hedges. I'm trimming away when, all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see a black spot, almost like a black sheet that someone has hung to dry off the side of the house. The flickering black is so deep that you can almost see green, purple, blue hues. As quickly as it came, it disappeared. This happened multiple times all throughout the morning. In total, I must have seen this spot 4 to 5 times. What has started out as a larger black flickering sheet would turn out more refined every time I saw it, always out of the corner of my eye. Last I saw it for the day, it would have been around noon, and by then, a more slender, human-like figure was present from the shoulders up, with sort of a foggy, undefined bottom. Not being a big believer and almost an atheist, I convinced myself that it was stress or too much brightness outside and went on about my day as if nothing had happened. August 25th, 2019. I visit my parents' house. They live about 5 miles down the road from us. They had moved into their new home only a couple of months prior. Spent most of the day just hanging out. I'm driving back home, thinking of all the things I must do at work Monday morning. I'm driving, but I'm a bit unfocused, kind of daydreaming, numb from all the things our family is going through, and worried how the next couple of months will turn out with my dad's disease. Come to the one and only stop sign between our places. Brake, look left, look right, hit the gas. Out of thin air, a shadow appears right in front of the car. I didn't quite see it fully. The reflex was to immediately hit the brakes again, mid-intersection. Just as it came, it was gone. This time, I shared with what I saw with my partner, only to receive a call from my mom a few hours later. Dad is not doing well, and he's being rushed to the hospital. August 26, 2019. Dad unexpectedly passes. I said his death was unexpected because, even with a cancer diagnosis, he was doing quite well. He had just started his treatment, and for the first time since his 3-week-old diagnosis, we thought we would have him around for another year or so. What exactly did I see? Why at my house and not at theirs? Granted, my parents had lived with us from December to May while their home was being built. In the midst of all the grief, I started to look for answers as to what I experienced. Seems to be some form of shadow people. I believe they came to warn or to guide him to the afterlife. Anyway, just wanted to share my experience and see if anyone else has similar ones. I'll preface this by saying that my wife is 100% a skeptic. She is a very rational, scientific person and chooses to believe in what is proven and what she can quantify. But I will say, I think that's in part because she doesn't like being scared. She doesn't like scary movies, and she dismisses the idea of ghosts or other cryptids. That being said, a few weeks ago, she woke me up at 3 a.m. saying that she 100% saw someone in our house, that our animals were spooked, and she asked me to search the house. I got my gun from my nightstand and searched the house and checked the doors and windows, and finding no one, to return to bed, where we discussed what she saw. She says that she woke up and saw the figure of a man walking out of our bedroom door. She even heard the floorboards creak as it walked out. But all of our animals were either on the bed with us or sleeping next to it. Since then, she's seen it almost every night, either leaning into the doorway with a hand on the door frame, or fully in the room, standing at the foot of the bed. She attempts to rationalize it and eventually falls back asleep, which I hear is common with these kinds of scenarios. The worst one was a few nights ago, where she had a terrible dream where I left for work, and she felt the creature get into bed with her and put its arm over her as though it was attempting to cuddle. Even skeptics have their limits, and she doesn't want to talk about it because it's frightening her, and it's not something she could just rationalize anymore. Is there anything I can do to help put her mind at ease? From everything I've read, they very rarely cause any kind of physical harm, but I'm worried that this might do her mentally. We have a 10-month-old son, and she works nights, so her on and off days she's forced to maintain normal day hours and has trouble sleeping through the night because she's normally awake then. I've always felt I've had this sight since a child. There is a room in my grandmother's house called the Red Eye Room. Apparently, my family has been calling it that for years because a being with red eyes will climb on top of you while sleeping and stare at you. I had this happen and felt and saw the bed sag from the weight, and all I could do was scream. Fast forward to now, I'm 25. I woke up out of a dead sleep, and I see red eyes reaching towards me with a beaming smile, and before he reaches me, I scream, and he evaporates. I ran out of my house. I believe he may be in my closet, as funny as that sounds, but I see my hangers move sometimes, and nothing could be disturbing them but an outside force. Not sure if it's menacing, but it's never spoken to me or made a noise. Just watched me. I guess I don't remember exactly when I started seeing a tall, skinny black figure, but it has been happening on and off for years now. I didn't know it was abnormal. I went to a meditation retreat 2 years ago, and on the 4th day, I was terrified to close my eyes because whenever I did, Multiple black figures with yellow glowing eyes would propel themselves towards me, and I would open my eyes right before they reached my face. I couldn't sleep at night because I was terrified they would come, and they did when the lights were off, even with my eyes open. During the meditation sessions, I would just sit there with my eyes open and silently cry, safely in a room full of 80 other people. I was scared for my life within my own mind, but also transferring to the physical. I was scared, confused, and terrified. I requested to talk to the leader or whatever because we could ask questions for 5 minutes. I told him about it, and he said that all I needed to do was to keep my eyes shut while they came at me and let it happen. Face them, let them take over, and accept them. I went back and did that, and I had to force myself to squeeze my eyes tight and to not open them. It was absolutely terrifying, but they did not come back for the rest of the retreat, and I was able to sleep and meditate. I started seeing a tall figure again this winter. It appears out of the corner of my eye, and when I look, it slides away. When it happens during the day, I am scared but feel safer. But when it happens at night, I'm terrified. I either sit as still as I can or hold my breath and run to my room. The place I live has a lot of sharp corners going into different rooms, so that makes it way worse than even running away. I was an avid Indian artifact hunter. Service finds only though. I got out of college classes early that day and decided to give it a go in a creek I hadn't been over for some time. As I drove down into the area, I noticed a pickup parked with 2 gentlemen sitting on the tailgate in the shade from the hot sun. The truck was a Ford, 2-tone in color, white over brown. I asked them if they were practicing as to where, so I could stay out of their road. They said there was a special deer season open, and they were tracking one. I walked to a different place than I had planned to hunt, and told them where I would be. I walked over to the creek and started in. I guess I was into the area, maybe 50 yards, and the truck didn't waste any time spinning up the hill. They came north, and one guy jumped out, and the other guy drove on north and got out. I found this a little disturbing and decided they might be hunting me. I climbed out of the creek in short order and was about to walk back to my truck and leave. As I came over the bank, there was this creature sitting on the ground, leaning against a tree. It could have been 12 feet tall if it was standing up. I was only 20 feet from this thing. It was an oaf-looking creature sitting on its butt with its back against a large oak tree. It was sleeping with its hands and fingers locked together, stretched out across its knees. It was sleeping there with massive amounts of leaves in its very long, brownish hair, which covered it head to toe, including the face, and it didn't seem to matter what color or shade they were. The hair seemed to blend in perfectly. I'm wondering if its hair is hollow like a deer's hair. I honestly was completely shocked, and all the hair on my body rose to attention. I recognized this thing from pics and magazines and such. I felt nauseous and confused. As I hopped back into the creek out of sight from it, it rose and bolted east right in the direction of those guys. I heard it cut across the gravel on the road, and that was it. It never went back to that creek. At night, while in the process of going to sleep or waking up from sleep, I have experienced, and will presumably continue to experience, the phenomenon known as sleep paralysis, paired with appearances from what I've come to know as shadow people. This is not a fictionalized creepypasta, nor any kind of bait and switch, me and my buddy saw this thing in the woods type of writing. I certify that everything in this writing is true in the sense that I've personally experienced it. This is not intended to be in any way funny. I am dead serious. I think that reading this may be disturbing for some, so please note that this is a warning. Let me start by noting that I am in no way superstitious and have a strictly scientific worldview. I don't believe in any kind of supernatural, ghosts, gods, angels, demons, the paranormal, or cryptozoology, or anything that would lead me to a supernatural explanation for these things. My current dominant hypothesis is that my brain, being the incredibly complex machine that it is, functions somewhat poorly during the shutdown wake-up cycles and creates these things for me to experience, and that they are only hallucinations. When I speak of the shadow people as they, or him, or her, what I really mean is the human-shaped hallucination that my brain created for me. Also, I'm not sure if this is related or not, but I occasionally experience absence seizures. When this happens, I begin to feel extremely lightheaded, then overheated and nauseated, and then I see stars near the edges of my vision. Then the stars close in and fill my vision. I collapse. I become non-lucid and non-responsive, and I can only hear the environment around me in distorted frequencies. This usually only goes on for a few minutes, though it is hard to tell me while I'm like this. It happens about 2 to 3 times per year and can be triggered by perceived mental stressors. This started when I hit puberty and is still ongoing. In the most plain of terms, something about my brain is messed up and has serious malfunctions at times. I am aware of it though. You might think me less sane after reading this though. The occurrences of sleep paralysis and shadow people, hallucinations, started when I was in my early 20s and I was in college, probably around 2007. I was living in an apartment with a roommate, and when I wasn't getting dead drunk, I would routinely stay up for extended periods, 30 plus hours or more, to get my class assignments done on time. The repeat alcohol ingestion and sleep deprivation, in hindsight, represent risk factors that I now believe trigger these. Based on my own experiences, other risk factors for me include use of any kind of stimulants or depressants, or psychotropic drugs, high stress levels, and emotional and psychological instability. On one typical evening, I was in the process of waking up from a midday nap in the apartment. I had abused caffeine and sugar to push myself to finish a class assignment overnight, and naturally needed to catch up on lost sleep. I had fallen asleep on my bed in my street clothes. It was the kind of sleep that one gets after staying up for way too long. The best kind. I was lying on my back and beginning to drift towards consciousness, but wasn't fully awake yet. An in-between state. In this half-dreaming, half-awake state, I suddenly began to experience 2 very new things. A feeling of intense, icy fear, and the feeling of a presence being in the room with me with malicious intent. As I looked toward the end of my bed, I saw a shadowy figure standing silently at the opposite side of the room. Judging from its form, it appeared to be a young adult male. The strangest thing about the figure was that it had no discernible features, instead of just being an icy black silhouette with poorly defined edges, almost like more of a shadow than a physical object in and of itself. The figure then moved toward the foot of my bed, stopped, and simply stared at me, all the while projecting an extremely threatening presence through its body language. As this was happening, I felt that I needed to move to a sitting position and to tell this person to get the hell out of my room and leave my apartment. But strangely, found that I could not. I couldn't move, speak, or do anything except move my eyes to follow the movement of the figure, and was forced to lay completely still in a state of intense, paralyzing fear. The situation became extremely personally invasive and upsetting as the figure had moved slowly from the end of my bed to a position directly beside me, standing over me, well inside of my personal space. I was still unable to do anything about it but breathe heavily and sweat. In that moment, I wanted absolutely nothing but for the figure to go away and leave me alone. I jolted awake in an instant, gasping for air, convinced that there was somebody in the room with me. So I took out my pocket knife. I always have one in my pocket in my street clothes, waved it around in the near darkness, and screamed at the perceived intruder to tell them to get out of my room, and stumbled to the light switch. After turning on the lights, there was no sign of the mysterious figure. I repeatedly searched the small apartment for any sign of entry or disturbance. I found no sign of my roommate, and no sign of any intruder either. Being a skeptic, I also immediately began questioning the reality of the experience and my perceptions. Had it been a nightmare? I hadn't felt like a nightmare, yet I obviously hadn't been fully awake either. It had felt more like a mixed reality, as though between waking and dream states. Clearly, this was something new and different. Waking up from this experience and mentally processing this was disorientating and upsetting, to say the least. I went to the bathroom, splashed some cold water on my face, and talked aloud to myself to mentally reinforce what I was doing, and fully regained my orientation and sense of reality. Later, after my roommate got home, I asked him why the hell he had been in my room while I was trying to sleep, and why he had just stood over my bed like that. I told him that he had seriously scared the hell out of me, and asked him not to do anything like that ever again. He said he didn't know what I was talking about, and that he wasn't home at the time. I said that I must have had a real serious nightmare, and went on about my business for the day. At this point, I thought that I might be going insane. I had never seen anything in my life that would not easily be explained by my existing scientific worldview, but simultaneously could not explain the bizarre and upsetting experience that I had just had. In my mind, I very quickly searched for any and all existing references to anything that could explain what I had just seen, no matter how ridiculous, and assembled a number of competing hypotheses: hallucination, nightmare, mental malfunction, someone drugged me, someone broke into the apartment while I was asleep, ghosts, demons, alien abduction, interdimensional beings, out-of-body experiences, and the list went on from there. I did a Google search, which actually turned up a wealth of information. In relative terms, as the internet as a whole was not as well developed in 2007 as it is today, from those who had similar experiences. I found references to callers on Coast to Coast AM reporting seeing shadow men while in transitionary sleeping to waking states, and the appearances being paired with the feelings of intense fear and inability to move. The phenomenon is called sleep paralysis and is very well documented, though the initial experiences were severely disquieting, and I cannot emphasize this enough. I felt better having a reasonable explanation for it. In my opinion, what makes this so upsetting for so many people around the world is that it is a variation on the classic human fear of home invasion, and the imagery lends itself to supernatural explanations. After this first experience during young adulthood, I would have many more over the years of my life, continuing into adulthood. The nature of shadow people is ever-changing. They were always threatening at first, like the first experience that I had in the college apartment, until I fully accepted that I would be visited by them during the night at random times. They seemed to want to invent new ways to surprise me. In a way, the shadow people are kind of like real people, because their own motivations and behaviors vary so wildly. They emerge from the shadows on my walls or any area of the room, though they seem to prefer my closet. I try to never sleep facing away from my closet because of this. They can look like men, women, or children of all ages, and can be single or multiple. However, they are always only black silhouettes with no distinct features. The historical majority are entirely human, but some appear to be humanoid creatures. Some wear clothing, but others do not. They may present different body language, depending on their personality. Things that the shadow people don't do include making sound and interacting with physical objects, including touching me in the room. Strangely, whenever they are present, I get the feeling that they cannot touch or otherwise directly interact with me because I know that they are not real. I have no idea what it would feel like to be touched by one of them, but I do know that I would never want to find out. The shadow people don't seem to acknowledge the concept of personal space, and would just as soon stand anywhere in the room as inches from my face. They usually observe me, and will sometimes attempt interaction. When multiple shadow people are present, they are able to sense interact with each other. The majority of the shadow people that I experience are, for a lack of a better term, telepathic. They are able to project feelings and narratives into my mind, along with forcing me to feel their presence. Thus, I am able to understand their motivations, even though they cannot speak to me, and to know when they are in my bedroom relative to me, even when I can't see them. The feelings and narratives can be anything from, I am only here to observe you, to, I don't really want or need to be here, to, I enjoy making you feel threatened. They can be curious, shy, funny, friendly, mischievous, or even unaware of me altogether. The majority are benign in the sense that they have no malicious intent. However, the telepathy can be extremely disturbing when a shadow person does have the malicious intent, as it will project feelings of terror and doom into my mind. As typical as some behaviors are of types of shadow people, some people just don't seem to follow the established rules. These are just examples of unique ones that I have experienced. One non-human creature, similar to a combination of a dog/human or a werewolf. It sat on the edge of my bed, just past my left leg, with a hostile, hunched-over body posture that animals make when they think that you're a threat. A taller, angular adult male with limbs and fingers too long, and several accompanying children. It signaled that they were the only there to briefly observe me, and that they didn't mean to disturb me. Very polite and non-hostile. Appeared from and disappeared back into my closet. It was almost like a school teacher with students on a field trip. A slender young woman in the flowing gown with arms that ended in asymmetrical claws, resembling tree branches, and a head like a combination of a dog's and a human's. She stood with the haunched posture, mostly still near the foot of my bed, but I could tell from her telepathic broadcast that she was waiting for me to look away, and that she wanted to harm me somehow. She thought of herself as some kind of huntress. During the fall of 2016, I had a new development. I began hearing loud noises while waking up, like gunshots, rumbling, metallic banging, roaring, human screams, or doors opening and slamming. Having already experienced the shadow people for something like a decade, my first thought was something along the lines of, well, it looks like these little butts are up to new tricks. Oh well, nothing new. After this happened a few times, I Googled and found exploding head syndrome, which perfectly describes what I experience and is even known to have an overlap with those who experience sleep paralysis. I don't know why it took so damn long for my brain to start thinking that it hears these things, but I'm not really surprised by it at all. As I've said above, the hallucinations during my waking-sleeping transitions are ever-changing. Then, after the development of sound, things took a turn for the weird, dark, and scary. During a fairly recent sleep paralysis incident in the winter of 2016, I was visited by what I can only describe as a shadow person in the form of a disembodied voice. I was sleeping on my left side, facing towards my bedroom window and away from my closet. The darker part of my room and my closet was over my right shoulder. As I was transitioning to wakefulness, I felt that familiar presence of a shadow person, but was surprised by the amount of hatred that it projected for me. It was very specific and personal. I sensed the presence coming closer in my bedroom, to the point of being just over my right shoulder and ear. Of course, as in all cases, I was in that state of paralysis, and thus was unable to turn to look to see the form of the shadow person. I got the feeling that this shadow person was unhappy with me, unhappy with being in my room, and wanting to physically harm me despite being unable to do so. Typical. But then, to my absolute shock, amazement, and terror, the shadow person began speaking to me. The voice was my own, but forced into a low growl, saturated with pure hate. It was extremely verbally abusive, saying things like, "If you don't think I'm real, why don't you turn over and look at me? You're a coward, a liar, and you lie to yourself about us. Why are you surprised? You didn't think that we could talk to you. You're stupid and pathetic. You think you've accepted us, but you know nothing about us." Per the usual, I jolted awake and screamed things back at the presence, which had by then vacated. I was just so shocked that a shadow person had spoken to me, and that it had done so in such an abusive way, that it was almost like going through the experience of initial exposure all over again. To say the least, this incident seriously disturbed me, and led me beginning to write what you read now. During this, I never visually saw what this speaking shadow person looked like, and I'm glad for that. Speaking shadow person being a product of my mind, if you're still in my subconscious somewhere and can read what I'm typing, go screw yourself. As I wrote the majority of all the above, problems began to develop. Thinking and writing about my history with these experiences for a few days in a row during February of 2017 triggered the EHS and the shadow people hallucinations often, and I was woken up several times per night by them. This went on for about a week or so and became increasingly disruptive. Then I set into motion the worst shadow person incident that I have ever experienced when I made the mistake of discussing the writing of the story with my online gaming clan on our VOIP channel. I discussed them at length, and especially in the aspect that thinking about them directly correlated with the frequency of their appearances. I then wondered aloud about why the shadow people could not touch me when they cannot affect my other senses, such as sight and sound. That very same night, I fell asleep in my bed on my stomach after getting kind of drunk. As I was beginning to wake and entered the familiar state of paralysis, I heard a series of door slamming noises and footsteps approaching my room. Even though I couldn't see, I sensed the presence of a shadow person, a young adult woman with malicious intent. She entered the bedroom, and to my horror, surprise approached the bed and climbed on top of my back in an unwelcome and uncomfortable way. I was shocked to feel a sensation of her knees resting on my shoulder blades and her weight pressing down on me. Her skin felt like human skin. I'm not sure what I would have expected, and still not sure what to make of this. Bending down over me, she whispered taunting things into my ear from behind me and repeatedly laughed at me. She said things like, "I am here. We are all still here. Your mind is not your own. You are ours to torment." Her laughter wasn't jovial or friendly at all, but icy. After waking up from this disturbing experience, it was at that point that I realized that I was uncomfortable continuing to write about this aspect of my history, because thinking about it so much was actively causing more intense and disturbing hallucinations with malicious tones. So I stopped. I think it took about a month for me to revisit and complete this. This brings us to the present time. I haven't really seen many shadow people since the incident with the last speaking, touching woman, and certainly none as unique as her or other malicious speaking hallucinations. I now believe that thinking about these additional abilities of speech and touch may have in turn given my brain the idea to include those abilities in the hallucinations. I've been up for about 4 hours longer than I should have writing this through the night. I'm going to take a nap before work, and I'll sure as hell sleep on my back. I live in Greensville, Texas, north of town, just off of Highway 69 North. I have lived here for 12 years and have had strange things going on at my house since I moved here. But in the last 2 to 3 years, things have really started happening more. I live down a dirt road off of Highway 69. There are a lot of woods around me. Also, have several neighbors around me too. In late summer of 2017, I was jolted awake in the middle of the night by a loud banging on my house. I knew I wasn't dreaming because I shot straight up. And at that exact moment, my 2 little dogs flew off my bed, barking and carrying on. I stumbled into the kitchen, wondering what could be happening, and it was 2:38 a.m. My 2 big dogs outside were not barking, which I thought was odd. To make a long story short, I called the sheriff's department, and 2 deputies came out, but found nothing. From that moment on, every 2 or 3 months, I have several incidents for a week or 2, and then nothing for another month or 2 or 3. Then, things happen again. This past winter, from November of 2019 to February 2020, I have had several things happen. On 3 separate occasions while I have been propped in bed watching TV, I have heard a loud growl outside my bedroom, loud enough to hear it over the TV. It was loud and guttural. I have had tapping on the back of my house during the night. It is usually always around the same time of night. In January of 2020, I was once again propped up in bed watching TV, and over my TV, I heard something rubbing on the back of my house on where the wall to my bathroom is. My bedroom and bathroom run together, and my 2 little dogs jumped off the bed into the bathroom at the back wall barking. I've had rocks thrown at my house. I'm home alone most of the time, but this past Saturday night, April 18th, 2020, my husband just happened to be home. Between 11 and 11:30 p.m., my dog started barking and wouldn't stop, so I got her to holler at her to hush. As I got my bedroom door open, my cat was lying in my rocking chair next to my door. I paused to let her out about the time. I heard that same loud guttural growl at my back door. My cat heard it, wheeled around and looked at the back door. I went and woke my husband up. He looked out the back door and saw nothing. I went to the front door and opened it and called my dog. She would not get close to the fence and was barking, looking towards the back of the house towards my neighbor's home behind us. All of a sudden, she jumped back, like whatever it was coming towards her. I ran to my guest room to look out the window facing that direction and back towards northwest. I saw something huge and dark in color going across my neighbor's back pasture, moving fast. My neighbor behind me lives alone, and she has had the same things happening at her house. It was in the fall of 2006. We were camping in the Volga River recreational area in Fayette, Iowa. It was myself and 5 other friends. We were sitting around the campfire. I'm gonna have to say it was around 11:30 p.m. There was a campsite farther down from us with a husband and a wife. They also were sitting by the fire. My friends and I decided to take a walk about the campsite. There's an open field along the road and the campsite. Josh and I decided to sit there to see if we could call in some coyotes that night, because the moon was full that night, making it easy to see. The rest of the guys went back to the campsite. Josh and I went and sat along the side of the field. We were sitting there, making the sound of a dying rabbit. The field is bordered with large trees and bushes. After about 5 to 10 minutes, we see a large person step out onto a little hill at the edge of the trees off to our left. We had a tall friend with us, so started saying to the person, "Haha, Mike, very funny." Gestures of that sort, and that person didn't move nor speak. All we could see was its upper torso and its eye color, and I can't recall the exact color, so we ran back to the campsite to make sure it wasn't just our friends spooking us, and sure enough, they were all there. Josh and I grabbed a shotgun that I had brung for safety, and when we got back to the spot, the person was gone. We were both very frightened by this, and we ran back to the campsite, told everyone what we had heard, but nobody believed us. Later that night, I saw it again. This time it was in the woods, across from our campsite, just on the edge of the woods. The moonlight was bright, and this time I called everyone to come look over. And this time, Mike, Josh, and me all saw a very large black shadow across the road, moving towards the first spot we had just seen it. After the incident, I really had no idea what this was. It was very large, like a man, probably about 8 feet tall, and I could tell it had its back to us, and it was black in color. I also saw eyes, and that is all I can recall from the incident. Hearts were definitely racing at the time. I took my son Miles fishing behind Sundown Mountain Ski Resort. We turned west off of Asbury Road onto Twin Springs Drive, where there is access to the stream. I had been promising my son some night fishing. We sat on a couple of buckets facing south to the rock outcropping and wooded area across the creek. We were fishing in the deeper water, across the creek near the rocks. We heard sticks breaking and rustling, which I assumed were coons, as this is a good coon area. Then we noticed something larger coming toward the other side of the creek from a distance. Thinking that this was one of the many deer that we often see, thought nothing of it until we caught sight of it in the backlight of the city or moon from the other side of the hill that we were facing. This was a large bipedal animal, very unlikely to be a person, and this time of night without a light, although we were fishing without a light source also. It came up to the top of the rock outcropping, direct across from us, and stood between two trees. It then squatted down and just sat there, watching us. My son was scared, and I was intrigued. Within 10 minutes, another came to join the first to his right, and stayed just across a ravine. No more than 6 minutes later, another came from the south, just to the left of the one squatting across from us. As this one got close, it let out a piercing shriek, nothing like the calls that we had heard on TV shows. This was high-pitched and frightening. The other two took notice and began to move toward the shrieking squatch. At this point, we had enough and grabbed our fishing gear and ran back to the truck.